The morning of the state science fair dawned gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's nervous energy as she carefully packed her presentation materials and checked her notes one final time. Her mother had managed to get the day off after Mrs. Harrison's diplomatic intervention, and Elena was dressed in her best outfit, her face glowing with pride and anticipation. They arrived at the convention center where the fair was being held to find hundreds of students from across the state setting up their displays. The scale of the competition was intimidating, with projects ranging from advanced robotics to environmental research that looked like graduate-level work. Sarah and Marcus found their assigned table and began setting up their display on catalyst efficiency. Their project, which had seemed so impressive at school, suddenly felt modest compared to some of the elaborate presentations around them. Sarah's confidence wavered as she watched teams with expensive equipment and professional-looking displays. "Hey," Marcus said quietly, noticing her expression. "Our research is solid. Don't let the fancy displays psych you out." "I know," Sarah replied, but her voice lacked conviction. She was acutely aware of every difference between her team and the others. Where other students had matching polo shirts with their school logos, she and Marcus wore their best regular clothes. Where other teams had parents with cameras and encouraging smiles, Sarah had her tired mother sitting in the viewing area with Mrs. Harrison, who had surprised them all by attending. The judging began at 10 o'clock, with teams of scientists and academics moving from table to table, asking detailed questions about methodology, conclusions, and practical applications. Sarah watched the judges approach other displays, noting their serious expressions and thorough questioning. When the judges reached their table, Sarah felt her mouth go dry. The lead judge, a stern-looking woman from the state university, examined their display with sharp eyes before asking her first question. "Tell me about your hypothesis and how you tested it," Sarah began speaking, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger as she explained their research into how different catalysts affected reaction rates in common chemical processes. Marcus handled the technical questions about their equipment and measurements, while Sarah focused on the theoretical framework and practical implications of their findings. "Your methodology is quite sound," one of the judges observed. "Did you consider testing additional variables?" "We did preliminary testing on temperature variations," Sarah replied, pulling out additional data they had collected. "We found that catalyst efficiency changed significantly with temperature, but we decided to focus on the catalyst comparison for this project." The judges spent 20 minutes at their table, longer than Sarah had seen them spend anywhere else. Their questions were challenging but showed genuine interest in the research. When they finally moved on, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about their performance. The results wouldn't be announced until late afternoon, leaving several hours for Sarah and Marcus to walk around and observe the other projects. As they toured the displays, Sarah began to notice something interesting. Many of the flashiest presentations had weak underlying research, while some of the most impressive scientific work came from students whose displays were as modest as their own. During lunch break, Elena and Mrs. Harrison joined them at a table in the convention center cafe. Elena's eyes were bright with excitement as she described watching the judges question Sarah. "I was so proud," Elena said, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You answered every question perfectly. You sounded like a real scientist." "She is a real scientist," Mrs. Harrison added firmly. "I may not understand all the technical details, but I could see that the judges were impressed with her knowledge." As they sat together, Sarah realized that this was the first time she had ever felt completely supported in an academic setting. Her mother's pride was palpable, Mrs. Harrison's encouragement was genuine, and Marcus had proven to be a true friend and partner. The afternoon brought additional presentations and a public exhibition where families and community members could view the projects. To Sarah's surprise, several of her tutoring clients and their families had come to see her presentation. David, her first tutoring student, brought his parents and proudly introduced Sarah as the best chemistry tutor ever. Even more surprising was the appearance of Mr. Peterson and two other teachers from Lincoln High. They had driven down to support their students, and Mr. Peterson made a point of telling anyone who would listen about Sarah's exceptional academic performance. "She's one of the finest students I've taught in 20 years, he told Mrs. Harrison. "Her understanding of chemistry is intuitive and sophisticated." As the afternoon progressed, Sarah began to feel something she had never experienced before, a sense of belonging in an academic community. The other students treated her as an equal, the judges had respected her knowledge, and the adults around her were celebrating her achievements without qualification or surprise. At 4 o'clock, the announcement ceremony began. Awards would be given in multiple categories, including overall excellence, best presentation, most innovative research, and practical application. Sarah and Marcus sat in the audience with their families, watching as third-place awards were announced first. Second place in the chemistry division, the announcer called out, goes to Lincoln High School's team of Sarah Martinez and Marcus E. Chen for their research on catalyst efficiency and chemical reactions. The auditorium erupted in applause as Sarah and Marcus walked to the stage in a daze. Second place at the state level was an incredible achievement, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she accepted the medal and certificate. But the ceremony wasn't over. The judges have also selected this year's recipient of the Outstanding Young Scientist Award, given to the individual student who demonstrates exceptional scientific thinking and presentation skills. This year's recipient is Sarah Martinez of Lincoln High School. The second announcement hit Sarah like lightning. An individual award meant recognition beyond the team project, acknowledgement of her personal scientific abilities. As she walked back to the stage alone, she could see her mother crying in the audience and Mrs. Harrison applauding enthusiastically. The Outstanding Young Scientist Award came with a scholarship to the state, science camp, and an automatic nomination for a prestigious national academic scholarship. More than the practical benefits, though, it represented validation of everything Sarah had worked toward. When the ceremony ended, Sarah was surrounded by congratulations from other students, parents, and teachers. For the first time in her life, she was the center of positive attention, celebrated for her achievements rather than criticized for her circumstances. The drive home was joyful and emotional. Elena couldn't stop talking about how proud she was, and Marcus kept joking about how they would have to start calling Sarah the award winner. Mrs. Harrison, who had followed them back to town, insisted on taking everyone out for dinner to celebrate. That evening, as they sat in a nice restaurant that Sarah had never imagined being able to afford, she looked around the table at the people who had supported her journey, her mother who had sacrificed everything for her education, Mrs. Harrison who had seen potential where others saw only limitations, Marcus who had been a true friend when she needed one most. "I have something to tell you all," Sarah said, pulling out an envelope she had been carrying. "I got the preliminary notification yesterday, but I didn't want to say anything until after the science fair." She opened the envelope and read aloud, "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a finalist for the Jefferson Academic Excellence Scholarship, which covers full tuition, room and board for 4 years of undergraduate study." The table erupted in celebration, and Sarah realized that her life had fundamentally changed. She would go to college, she would have opportunities her mother had only dreamed of, and she would never again have to limit her aspirations based on her family's economic circumstances. When they finally returned home that night, Sarah found a note that had been slipped under their door. It was from Jessica, and it was unlike any communication she had ever received from her former tormentor. "Sarah," it read, "I saw the news about your science fair win on social media. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you this year. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. You deserved better from all of us. Congratulations on your success." Sarah stared at the note for a long moment, then folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer. The apology was appreciated, but it was no longer necessary. She had moved beyond needing Jessica's approval or anyone else's validation. Looking back on the year, Sarah realized that the mockery and obstacles had ultimately made her stronger. Every challenge had forced her to work harder, to prove herself more thoroughly, and to develop resilience she never knew she possessed. The battle scars of her difficult year had become badges of honor, proof that she could overcome anything. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah thought about the future stretching out before her. College career opportunities to help other students who faced similar challenges. She would never forget where she came from, or the people who had lifted her up along the way. The weeks leading up to the state science fair became a whirlwind of intense preparation and mounting tension. Sarah and Marcus spent every free moment refining their project on catalyst efficiency, running additional experiments, and perfecting their presentation. Their chemistry teacher, Mr. Peterson, had arranged for them to present to other faculty members as practice, and each session built Sarah's confidence in public speaking. However, the increased attention their project was receiving at school only intensified the hostility from Jessica's group. What had started as casual mockery had evolved into something more deliberate and cruel. They began spreading rumors that Sarah was cheating, that her mother was doing her homework, and that she didn't deserve to represent Lincoln High at the state level. The rumors reached a crescendo one afternoon when Sarah discovered that someone had vandalized her locker again. This time, instead of just mocking notes, someone had poured syrup through the vents, ruining several of her textbooks and notebooks. Among the damaged items was her journal containing months of poetry and personal reflections. Sarah stared at the sticky mess in shock, feeling violated in a way that went beyond simple bullying. Her writing was private, personal, and now it was destroyed along with her chemistry notes and homework assignments. "Oh my God, Sarah, what happened?" Marcus had appeared at her side, his face showing genuine concern and anger at the scene. "Just the usual," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady as she salvaged what she could from the locker. But this wasn't usual. This was escalation, and Sarah knew it. She also knew that reporting it would likely make things worse, especially since she had no proof of who was responsible. That evening, as Sarah tried to rewrite her chemistry notes from memory, her mother noticed her daughter's unusual silence during dinner. "Something's wrong," Elena observed, setting down her fork. "What happened today?" Sarah hesitated, then told her mother about the locker incident. Elena's face grew dark with anger, an emotion Sarah rarely saw from her usually patient mother. "This has to stop," Elena said firmly. "I'm calling the school tomorrow." "Please don't," Sarah begged. "It will just make things worse. They'll say I'm running to Mommy for help. You could get in trouble with Mrs. Thompson." Elena was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn between protecting her daughter and maintaining the employment that kept them housed and fed. "There has to be another way," so she said finally. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Harrison called the next evening to ask if Sarah could tutor her grandson extra sessions before his midterm exams. During their conversation, she mentioned that she had heard about the state science fair. "I'm so proud of you for qualifying," Mrs. Harrison said warmly. "It's quite an achievement. I hope the school is supporting you properly." "They are," Sarah replied, not wanting to burden Mrs. Harrison with her problems. "You know," Mrs. Harrison continued, "my late husband was on the school board for many years. He always said that academic achievement should be celebrated and protected, regardless of a student's background. He would have been very impressed by your accomplishments." Something in Mrs. Harrison's tone suggested she knew more about Sarah's situation than she was directly acknowledging. Sarah wondered if word of the harassment had somehow reached the adult community, perhaps through other parents or school staff. The conversation gave Sarah an idea. If she couldn't stop the bullying through normal channels, perhaps she could rise above it so completely that it would become irrelevant. She threw herself into science fair preparation with renewed intensity, spending every spare moment in the chemistry lab or library. Marcus noticed the change in her focus and tried to get her to take breaks. But Sarah felt driven by something beyond normal ambition. "We need to win this," she told Marcus during one of their late-night practice sessions. "Not just place well. We need to win." "Why?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, I want to do well too, but you seem like it's life or death." Sarah paused in her calculations and looked at her lab partner. Marcus had been kind to her from the beginning, but she had never fully trusted his motives. Now facing the biggest challenge of her academic career, she decided to be honest. "Because if I don't prove myself now, I'll always be the maid's daughter to them," she said quietly. "But if we win, if I succeed at something they can't dismiss or minimize, then maybe their opinions won't matter anymore." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's a lot of pressure to put on one competition." "My whole life has been pressure," Sarah replied. "At least this time I'm in control of the outcome." The week before the state science fair, several things happened that tested Sarah's resolve. First, she received notification that she had been accepted for a preliminary interview for a prestigious academic scholarship that could cover her full college tuition. The interview was scheduled for the week after the science fair, creating an intense period where her entire future seemed to hang in the balance. Second, Jessica's harassment campaign reached new heights when she convinced several classmates to sign a petition requesting that Sarah be removed from the science fair team, claiming she didn't represent the values of Lincoln High. The petition never reached any authority figures, but word of its existence spread through the school, creating an atmosphere of division and controversy around Sarah's participation. Finally, Elena received notice from Mrs. Thompson that the family would be hosting an important dinner party the same weekend as the state science fair. Elena was expected to work, and Mrs. Thompson made it clear that any absence would be viewed unfavorably. "I'm not going," Elena announced when she shared the news with Sarah. "Your science fair is more important than any dinner party." "You can't risk your job," Sarah protested. "We need this work." "We need your future more," Elena replied firmly. "I didn't sacrifice everything to get you this far just to miss the most important day of your academic career." That night, Sarah called Mrs. Harrison to cancel her tutoring sessions for the weekend, explaining about the science fair competition. Mrs. Harrison was quiet for a moment, then surprised Sarah with an offer. "Would you like me to attend? I don't know much about science, but I'd love to support you. And perhaps I could speak with Mrs. Thompson about giving your mother the weekend off to attend as well." The offer was generous, but Sarah worried about the potential consequences for her mother's employment. "I don't want to cause problems." "My dear," Mrs. Harrison said gently, "sometimes standing up for what's right is worth a little inconvenience. Your mother should be there to see you succeed." The conversation ended with Mrs. Harrison promising to handle the situation diplomatically, and Sarah feeling grateful but nervous about the increasing complexity of her circumstances. As the science fair approached, Sarah found herself caught between excitement and terror. Everything she had worked for was culminating in this one competition. Her academic future, her family's financial stability, and her sense of self-worth all seemed to depend on her performance in front of judges who didn't know about the obstacles she had overcome just to stand at the presentation table. The night before the competition, Sarah sat in her small room reviewing her presentation notes one final time. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the Thompson family preparing for their dinner party, reminding her of the world she lived adjacent to but never quite belonged to. But tomorrow, none of that would matter. Tomorrow, she would stand in front of judges and demonstrate that intelligence, preparation, and determination could overcome any social barrier. Tomorrow, she would either validate every sacrifice her mother had made, or she would face the crushing disappointment of coming so close to changing their lives only to fall short. Either way, she would face it with the dignity and strength her mother had taught her, and with the knowledge that she had already accomplished more than anyone had expected from the maid's daughter. The change in Sarah's demeanor didn't go unnoticed by her classmates. Over the next few weeks, she carried herself differently, spoke up more in class, and seemed less affected by the whispered comments and pointed stares. Her tutoring business was thriving, with 5 regular clients now, and she had started a small savings account specifically for college expenses. Jessica and her friends seemed frustrated by Sarah's newfound confidence. Their usual tactics of exclusion and mockery weren't having the same devastating effect. If anything, Sarah seemed to be gaining respect from some of their classmates, particularly after her chemistry presentation had impressed even the most skeptical students. The situation came to a head on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. Sarah was walking home from school, her backpack heavy with textbooks and scholarship applications, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Jessica and 3 of her friends following her, their faces wearing expressions that made Sarah's stomach clench with familiar anxiety. "We need to talk," Jessica announced, stepping closer as her friends formed a semicircle around Sarah. "About what?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "About your attitude lately," Jessica replied coldly. "You seem to have forgotten your place around here." Sarah felt the old fear rising in her throat, but something else rose with it. Anger. Months of accumulated humiliation and frustration bubbled up inside her, and for the first time she didn't try to push it down. "My place?" Sarah repeated, her voice getting stronger. "What exactly is my place, Jessica?" "Don't play stupid. You know what I mean. You're acting like you're one of us, like you belong here. But new clothes and a little tutoring money don't change who you are or where you come from." The other girls nodded in agreement, and Sarah could see the satisfaction in their eyes as they waited for her to crumble the way she always had before. But Sarah didn't crumble. Instead, she stood up straighter and looked Jessica directly in the eye. "You're right. I do know where I come from. I come from a family that works hard for everything we have. I come from a mother who sacrifices everything so I can have opportunities. And I come from myself, and I'm smart enough and strong enough to earn my place anywhere I want to be." Jessica's face flushed with surprise and anger. She wasn't used to Sarah fighting back, and the unexpected response seemed to throw off her usual rhythm of intimidation. "You think you're better than us now?" one of the other girls sneered. "No," Sarah replied calmly. "I think I'm different from you. I think I know what it means to work for something instead of having it handed to me, and I think I appreciate opportunities because I know how rare they are." The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment, a car approached. Mrs. Harrison was driving slowly through the neighborhood and pulled over when she saw the group of girls. "Sarah, dear, is everything all right?" Mrs. Harrison called through her window. The presence of an adult immediately changed the dynamics of the situation. Jessica and her friends couldn't very well continue their intimidation with a witness present, especially one from their own social circle. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Harrison," Sarah replied. "I was just heading home. Would you like a ride?" "It's starting to rain harder," Sarah accepted gratefully, leaving Jessica and her friends standing on the sidewalk as she got into Mrs. Harrison's warm car. "Those girls seemed upset about something," Mrs. Harrison observed as they drove away. "They don't like that I'm tutoring their neighbors' children," Sarah said carefully. "They think I'm getting above myself." Mrs. Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, I've lived in this neighborhood for 25 years. I've seen a lot of young people come and go. Some of them had every advantage imaginable and did nothing with it. Others had to fight for every opportunity and made the most of it. The ones who had to fight are usually the ones who accomplish something meaningful with their lives." Her words stayed with Sarah long after she had been dropped off at home. That evening, as she helped her mother prepare dinner in their tiny kitchen, she told Elena about the confrontation with Jessica. "Maybe I should just try to stay out of their way," Sarah concluded. "I don't want to make things harder for you with Mrs. Thompson." Elena stopped stirring the pot and turned to face her daughter. "Mija, let me tell you something. When I was your age in Mexico, people told me I should be happy to work in the fields like my parents. They said education was for other people, not for girls like me. But I didn't listen, and I managed to go to university and become a teacher." Sarah looked at her mother with new eyes. Elena rarely spoke about her life in Mexico or the dreams she had given up when she came to America. "What happened to teaching?" Sarah asked. "Life happened. Your father, then you, then he left, and I had to survive. But that doesn't mean my education was wasted. Everything I learned, everything I experienced, it all led me here. And here is where I could raise a daughter who is smart enough to tutor the children of people who think they're better than us." Elena paused, then continued. "Don't you dare make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable. You have gifts, Sarah. Use them." That night, Sarah worked on her scholarship applications with renewed determination. She had deadlines approaching for several competitive academic scholarships, and she knew her essays needed to be perfect. She wrote about overcoming adversity, about the value of hard work, and about her dreams of using education to create opportunities not just for herself, but for others in similar situations. The next day at school, the atmosphere felt different. Word had spread about Sarah's confrontation with Jessica, and students were looking at her with curiosity rather than pity. Some seemed impressed that someone had finally stood up to Jessica's group, while others appeared to be waiting to see what would happen next. During lunch, Marcus approached Sarah with excitement in his voice. "Did you hear about the state science fair? Mr. Peterson thinks our chemistry project is good enough to compete. He wants to know if we're interested." The state science fair was a big deal, with college recruiters and scholarship opportunities for winners. Sarah's heart raced at the possibility, but she also felt nervous about the increased visibility it would bring. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "Are you up for it?" Sarah looked around the cafeteria, catching sight of Jessica's table where an animated discussion was taking place. She could guess what they were talking about, and she knew that entering a prestigious competition would only increase their animosity toward her. But then she thought about her mother's words from the night before, about not making herself smaller to make others comfortable. She thought about Mrs. Harrison's observation about young people who had to fight for opportunities, and she thought about her own dreams of college and a future where she could help other students overcome the same obstacles she was facing. Yes, she said firmly. Let's do it. Marcus grinned and started outlining their next steps for preparing their project for state competition. As they talked, Sarah felt a sense of momentum building. She was no longer just surviving high school. She was beginning to thrive despite the obstacles in her path. The scholarship applications were submitted on time, the tutoring business continued to grow, and now there was the science fair to prepare for. Each achievement built on the last, creating a foundation of confidence that no amount of mockery could completely shake. Sarah was learning that resilience wasn't about being immune to pain or criticism. It was about continuing to move forward despite the pain, continuing to reach for goals despite the criticism, and refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. Sarah's first tutoring session with Mrs. Harrison's grandson, David, took place the following Saturday. She spent Friday night reviewing her chemistry notes and preparing simple explanations for complex concepts. The nerves in her stomach felt like butterflies having a war as she walked up to the front door of the Harrison mansion. David turned out to be a sophomore at a private school across town, which meant he didn't know about Sarah's reputation at Lincoln High. He was struggling with basic chemical equations and seemed genuinely grateful for her help. For the first time in months, Sarah felt useful and respected. "You explain this way better than my teacher," David said after she helped him understand balancing equations.
"How do you make it seem so easy?"
"It's just about seeing the patterns," Sarah replied, feeling a confidence she rarely experienced at her own school. "Once you understand the logic, everything else falls into place." Mrs. Harrison paid her $50 for the 2-hour session, more money than Sarah had ever earned at once. As she walked home, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The money was important, but the sense of accomplishment mattered even more. At school on Monday, Sarah threw herself into the group project with Marcus and his lab partner, Kevin. They were studying the effects of different catalysts on reaction rates, and Sarah's thorough understanding of the subject quickly made her the group's leader. "You should present our findings to the class," Kevin suggested during one of their work sessions. "You know this stuff better than anyone." The idea of standing in front of her classmates and speaking publicly terrified Sarah, but she also recognized it as an opportunity to show that she was more than just a target for their mockery. Meanwhile, the tutoring sessions with David were going well. He was improving rapidly, and his confidence was growing with each session. Mrs. Harrison had started recommending Sarah to other families in the neighborhood, and soon she had 3 regular tutoring clients. The extra income meant Sarah could finally buy a decent pair of shoes and some clothes that didn't mark her as different from her classmates. More importantly, she was starting to save money for college applications. For the first time since moving to this town, she began to believe that her dreams might be achievable. However, her increased confidence at school didn't go unnoticed by Jessica and her friends. They seemed to sense that Sarah was becoming less vulnerable to their attacks, which only made them more determined to put her back in her place. "Look who thinks she's somebody now," Jessica commented loudly as Sarah walked past wearing her new sneakers. "New shoes won't change where you come from." Sarah kept walking, but she felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck. She had hoped that dressing better would help her blend in, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. Her attempts at improvement were seen as pretension rather than progress. The situation escalated one afternoon when Sarah was leaving her chemistry class. She had just finished presenting her group's project, and the presentation had gone extremely well. Mr. Peterson had praised their work, and even some of her classmates had seemed impressed by her knowledge. As Sarah gathered her materials, she overheard Jessica talking to her friends in the hallway. "I can't believe she's acting like she's smart," Jessica was saying. "My mom told me that her mom barely speaks English and cleans toilets for a living. How smart can her daughter really be?" The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mother spoke 3 languages and had been working toward her teaching degree before Sarah's father abandoned them, forcing Elena to take whatever work she could find to survive. But none of that mattered to people like Jessica, who saw only what they wanted to see. That evening, Sarah sat with her mother at their small kitchen table, helping her count the day's earnings from her various cleaning jobs. Elena's hands were red and cracked from the harsh chemicals she used, and she moved slowly, favoring her back that ached from hours of bending and scrubbing. "How was the presentation today?" Elena asked, looking up from the small pile of bills and coins. "It went well," Sarah replied. deciding not to mention Jessica's comments. Her mother carried enough guilt about their circumstances without hearing how it affected Sarah's social life. "I'm proud of you, Mia," Elena said softly. "You're going to have opportunities I never had. This education, it's your way out." Sarah nodded, but privately she wondered if education alone would be enough. Academic success felt meaningless when her classmates dismissed her achievements based on her family's economic status. The next day brought an unexpected challenge. Mrs. Thompson, Jessica's mother and Elena's primary employer, called Elena into her office in the main house. Sarah happened to be homesick with a cold and overheard the conversation through the thin walls. "Elena, I've been hearing some concerning things about your daughter," Mrs. Thompson was saying. "Some of the other children have mentioned that she's been acting inappropriately at school, trying to present herself as something she's not." Sarah's blood ran cold. She could hear her mother's voice, quiet and apologetic, explaining that Sarah was just trying to fit in and do well in her studies. "I understand that," Mrs. Thompson continued, "but I think it's important for children to know their place. False expectations can be cruel. Perhaps you should have a conversation with Sarah about being more realistic about her future." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. The message was clear. Stay in your lane, don't reach beyond your circumstances, and don't forget that your family's livelihood depends on the goodwill of people like us. That night, Sarah couldn't concentrate on her homework or her tutoring preparations. She kept thinking about Mrs. Thompson's words and the casual way she had dismissed Sarah's potential. The woman was essentially telling Elena to limit her daughter's dreams to match their current reality. But something inside Sarah had shifted over the past few weeks. The tutoring work had shown her that she was capable of more than just surviving her circumstances. She was actually good at something that people valued and were willing to pay for. She made a decision that night as she lay in bed listening to her mother's tired breathing from the next room. She wouldn't let Mrs. Thompson or Jessica or anyone else define the boundaries of her life. She would continue working hard, continue improving herself, and continue reaching for goals that others thought were beyond her reach. The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully in her best clothes and walked into Lincoln High with her shoulders straight and her chin up. She had 3 tutoring sessions scheduled for the weekend: a chemistry test to ace and college applications to research. During lunch, she approached the guidance counselor's office for the first time since starting at Lincoln High. Mrs. Rodriguez, the counselor, looked surprised to see her but welcomed her warmly. "I want to know about college scholarships," Sarah said directly. "I have good grades and I'm starting to save money from tutoring. What do I need to do?" Mrs. Rodriguez smiled and pulled out a thick folder filled with information about merit scholarships, need-based aid, and application deadlines. For the next 30 minutes, they discussed Sarah's options, her academic strengths, and the steps she needed to take. As Sarah left the guidance office with a folder full of scholarship applications, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Real, tangible hope, based on concrete steps and achievable goals. She didn't notice Jessica watching from across the hallway, her expression shifting from amusement to something that looked almost like concern. For the first time, Jessica was seeing Sarah not as a victim to be mocked, but as a potential threat to the established order of things. The next few weeks passed in a blur of humiliation and isolation for Sarah. The incident in the cafeteria had only emboldened Jessica and her friends, who seemed to take pleasure in finding new ways to remind Sarah of her place. They would accidentally bump into her in the hallways, causing her to drop her books, or make loud comments about the smell of cleaning supplies whenever she passed by. Sarah's mother, Elena, noticed her daughter's increasing withdrawal, but was too exhausted from her demanding work schedule to address it properly. She was cleaning 4 houses now, having taken on an additional client to save money for Sarah's college applications. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Elena was working herself to the bone to give Sarah opportunities that seemed increasingly out of reach. One particularly difficult day started when Sarah arrived at school to find her locker vandalized. Someone had stuck a note that read "Maid's Kit" across the front, and her combination lock had been filled with glue. She spent her first period in the bathroom, crying silently while trying to clean the sticky residue from her hands. During lunch, she overheard Jessica and her friends planning a party for the following weekend. They were discussing who to invite, deliberately speaking loud enough for Sarah to hear while making it clear she wasn't welcome. The casual cruelty of their exclusion cut deeper than their direct insults. "We need to make sure we get the guest list right," Jessica said, looking directly at Sarah. "We can't have just anyone showing up. It's going to be at my house, and my parents are trusting me to keep it classy." Sarah tried to focus on her homework, but the words on the page blurred together. She felt trapped in a cycle of humiliation with no way out. Her grades remained excellent, but what good were good grades when she couldn't afford college applications, let alone tuition? Marcus Chen had continued to sit with her occasionally, and while she appreciated the gesture, she couldn't shake the feeling that he pitied her. Pity was almost worse than mockery because it reminded her that everyone saw her as a victim. "Have you thought about joining any clubs?" Marcus asked one day as they sat in the library during lunch. "The debate team is looking for new members, and you're obviously smart enough." Sarah shook her head. "I don't have time. I help my mom with work most afternoons and weekends. What about the writing club? I saw your notebook that day in the cafeteria. Your poetry looked really good." The mention of her writing made Sarah uncomfortable. Those poems were private, a place where she could express feelings she couldn't share with anyone else. The idea of reading them aloud to classmates who already mocked everything about her was terrifying. That afternoon, Sarah walked home through the wealthy neighborhood, passing houses that cost more than her family would earn in a lifetime. She paused in front of one particularly impressive mansion, wondering what it would be like to live in a place where you never had to worry about money or whether you belonged. As she stood there, a car pulled up and Mrs. Harrison, one of her mother's clients, stepped out. Sarah had cleaned Mrs. Harrison's house several times when her mother needed help, and the woman had always been kind to her. "Sarah, dear, how are you?" Mrs. Harrison approached with a genuine smile. "How's school going?" "It's fine," Sarah replied automatically, the standard response she gave to all adult inquiries. Mrs. Harrison studied her face with concern. "You know, I was just telling your mother how impressed I am with your work ethic. Not many teenagers would spend their weekends helping their parents the way you do." The kindness in Mrs. Harrison's voice almost made Sarah cry. It had been so long since an adult had spoken to her with respect rather than pity or indifference. "I also wanted to ask," Mrs. Harrison continued, "would you be interested in tutoring my grandson? He's struggling with chemistry, and I remember your mother mentioning how well you do in science." "I'd pay you, of course." Sarah's heart jumped. A paying job would mean she could help her mother, and maybe even save some money for college applications. But then reality crashed back down. What would happen when Mrs. Harrison's grandson realized he was being tutored by the school outcast? "I'm not sure I'm qualified," Sarah said quietly. "Nonsense. Your mother tells me you're one of the top students in your class. Think about it and let me know." That evening, Sarah found her mother sitting at their tiny kitchen table, counting bills with tired eyes. Elena looked older than her 38 years, her hands rough and calloused from years of manual labor. "Mama, Mrs. Harrison offered me a tutoring job," Sarah said, sitting down across from her. Elena's face lit up with the first genuine smile Sarah had seen in weeks. "Mija, that's wonderful, you see? Your hard work is paying off." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "What if her grandson finds out about our situation and tells everyone at school?" Elena reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Sarah, there is no shame in honest work. What we do, it's dignified. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." But Sarah could see the doubt in her mother's eyes, the way Elena sometimes looked in mirrors as if she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The constant struggle to make ends meet was wearing on both of them. That night, Sarah made her decision. She would take the tutoring job, regardless of the potential social consequences. She needed the money, and more importantly, she needed to prove to herself that she was capable of something beyond being the target of her classmates' cruelty. The next day at school brought a new low point. Someone had started a rumor that Sarah's family was receiving welfare, and the gossip spread through the hallways like wildfire. Students pointed and whispered as she passed, and she heard fragments of conversations about charity cases and people who don't belong. During chemistry class, Mr. Peterson announced a group project that would count for 30% of their final grade. Sarah's heart sank as students quickly formed groups with their friends, leaving her sitting alone at her lab table. "Looks like we have an odd number," Mr. Peterson observed. "Sarah, you can join Jessica's group." The suggestion made Sarah's stomach lurch. Jessica's group consisted of the most popular and academically competitive students in the class. Being forced into their group would only give them more opportunities to humiliate her. Actually, Marcus spoke up from across the room. Could Sarah join our group instead? We could use someone strong in chemistry. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment as Mr. Peterson nodded his approval. Marcus was throwing her a lifeline, but it also highlighted her status as someone who needed rescuing. As the class ended and students filed out, Jessica stopped at Sarah's desk. "You're lucky Marcus feels sorry for you," she said quietly, her voice sweet but venomous. "But don't think this changes anything. You still don't belong here." Sarah watched Jessica walk away, her designer heels clicking confidently on the linoleum floor. The message was clear. No amount of academic success or small kindnesses from classmates would change her fundamental status as an outsider. But as Sarah packed up her books, she felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in months. Maybe it was defiance, or maybe it was just exhaustion from being afraid all the time. Either way, she made a silent promise to herself that she wouldn't let Jessica or anyone else define her worth. The tutoring job with Mrs. Harrison's grandson would be her first step toward independence. She might not be able to change how her classmates saw her, but she could start building a future where their opinions didn't matter. Sarah Martinez walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School with her head down, clutching her books tightly against her chest. The whispers followed her like shadows, and she could feel the stares burning into her back. At 17, she had grown used to being invisible, but lately, even invisibility seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Look at her shoes," someone snickered behind her. Sarah glanced down at her worn sneakers, the ones she had been wearing for 2 years because her mother couldn't afford new ones. The soles were coming apart, held together with duct tape that she tried to hide by walking carefully. The Martinez family had moved to this wealthy suburb 6 months ago when her mother, Elena, got a job as a cleaning lady for one of the mansion owners. They lived in a small apartment above the garage of the Thompson estate, an arrangement that came with Elena's employment. While Sarah was grateful for the roof over their heads, living on the property of her classmates' families made school a daily nightmare. "Hey, Sarah?" called out Jessica Williams, the daughter of the family her mother cleaned for. Jessica's voice was sweet but carried an edge that made Sarah's stomach clench. "My mom said your mom forgot to clean the guest bathroom yesterday. You should tell her to be more careful." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to explain that her mother had been working 16-hour days, cleaning 3 different houses to make ends meet, and that she was exhausted. But the words stuck in her throat as Jessica's friends giggled around them. Maybe if she spent less time gossiping with the other maids and more time working, another girl added, examining her perfect manicure with fake concern. Sarah hurried past them, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The kids at Lincoln High had a way of twisting everything she said, making her sound defensive or angry, which only gave them more ammunition. In the cafeteria, Sarah sat alone at a corner table, eating the free lunch that marked her as different from everyone else. She watched as groups of friends chatted and laughed, their designer clothes and confident voices creating an invisible barrier she could never cross. The food tasted like cardboard, but she forced herself to eat, knowing it might be the only substantial meal she would have until dinner. "Mind if I sit here?" Sarah looked up to see Marcus Chen, a quiet boy from her chemistry class. He was holding a lunch tray and looking genuinely friendly, which made Sarah suspicious. People didn't just sit with her unless they wanted something or were planning some kind of joke. "It's a free country," she mumbled, not making eye contact. Marcus sat down and began eating his sandwich. "I heard you got the highest score on the chemistry test last week." "That's pretty impressive," Sarah shrugged. She had always been good at school, but academic success felt hollow when she had no one to share it with. Her mother was too tired to celebrate her achievements, and her classmates saw her intelligence as another reason to mock her. "You know," Marcus continued, "I've been struggling with the periodic table. Maybe you could help me sometime?" Before Sarah could answer, a loud crash made everyone in the cafeteria turn. Jessica and her friends were standing near the trash cans, and Sarah's backpack was on the floor with her belongings scattered everywhere. Her notebook had fallen open, revealing pages of poetry she had written during lunch breaks. "Oops," Jessica said with fake innocence. "I accidentally knocked over your bag. What's all this writing? Are you working on your autobiography? My life as a maid's daughter?" The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Sarah scrambled to collect her things, her face burning with humiliation. Marcus started to help, but she grabbed her notebooks and stuffed them into her bag before running out of the cafeteria. She found refuge in the library, where Mrs. Patterson, the elderly librarian, pretended not to notice her red eyes and shaking hands. Sarah had spent countless hours here, losing herself in stories of people who overcame impossible odds. Books were her escape from a reality that felt increasingly hopeless. That afternoon, Sarah walked home slowly, dreading another evening in the small apartment where the walls were thin and she could hear every conversation from the main house. Her mother would be finishing her work soon, her hands raw from cleaning supplies and her back aching from hours of scrubbing floors. As she approached the Thompson estate, she could see Mrs. Thompson's car in the driveway. Sarah tried to slip around to the back entrance, but Mrs. Thompson spotted her. "Sarah, dear, could you tell your mother that we're having guests next weekend? The house will need to be spotless." Mrs. Thompson's voice was polite but distant, the way people talk to service providers rather than human beings. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied quietly, "and perhaps you could help her this time. Jessica mentioned that your mother seems overwhelmed lately." The implication was clear. If Elena couldn't handle the work alone, they could easily find someone who could. Sarah nodded, knowing that her weekend plans of studying and writing would now be spent scrubbing bathrooms and dusting furniture. That night, as Sarah lay in her narrow bed listening to her mother's exhausted breathing from the next room, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if things would ever change. She had good grades and dreams of college, but without money for applications or a car to get to a job. Those dreams felt as distant as the stars outside her small window. The mockery at school was getting worse, and she could see the toll it was taking on her mother, who blamed herself for their circumstances. Elena worked harder than anyone Sarah knew, but in this world of privilege and wealth, hard work without connections seemed meaningless. Sarah pulled her notebook from under her pillow and began writing by the light of her phone. Poetry was the only place where she could express the anger and sadness that consumed her. In her poems, she was strong and confident, capable of facing any challenge. But when morning came, she would have to close the notebook and return to being the girl everyone loved to mock. She wrote until her eyes grew heavy, pouring her heart onto the pages. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations and fresh reminders of her place in the social hierarchy of Lincoln High. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her small room, she could dream of a different life, one where people saw her worth instead of just her circumstances.